Hello, my name is Styx, and today we are going to be talking about mental illness, stigma, trauma response, coping skills, and I will put a trigger warning, obviously, and I will put a timestamp in the description. So, you know, I will be talking about all coping skills, and if that makes you uncomfortable entirely, maybe this isn't the video for you. And then options and personal recommendations that have been approved by my therapist, Jennifer. Thanks. So let's first talk about the mental illness stigma. When we talk about mental illness stigma, it comes from a very long line of just false information. I mean, for a ton of time, anyone that had any sign of mental illness, even if it was just independence of women, yes, they did put women that went away from their husbands or like try to be independent in a mental hospital. Um, and it's always been taught as a bad thing. Now, mental illness obviously is not a great thing to have to deal with. I'm not saying it's a good thing you should want a mental illness. What I am saying though is that it shouldn't be regarded as it is. Because when you hear the word mental illness, the first thing that you think of is like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like that's such an awful thing." And while yeah, it can be debilitating in many places, I feel like sorry really shouldn't be the response. And when anyone ever says that they've been to a mental hospital or they've had to be hospitalized, people's first response is very tense and is very, "Oh, you're crazy," unless you're talking to someone who also has experience with that. And I think that contributes to a lot of the poor coping skills our generation has, because our parents never talked about mental illness as openly as we do. And I think that being called sensitive and being called overreactive and not taking our mental health seriously, including our parents, including everyone. Everyone needs to take their mental health very seriously. If you had a cold, you would take it seriously. If you had the flu, you would take it seriously. So why not do your mental illness? The same. However, I would like to say that I think that a lot of the trauma that we have of repressing your actual emotions, including a lot of don't be girly for men. This is a very toxic, once again, toxic masculinity, a lot of misogyny, a lot of toxic gender role things that really just feed into this farther for the men side of things. And so now we're going to go into trauma response. So trauma responses are incredibly common. I mean, when a person develops trauma based on something, like repressing their emotions, and they start to feel that emotion again. Obviously, you could have been traumatized by that, or you could be any trauma, really. Anything can be trauma. If it is traumatic to you, then that is trauma. It does not matter. I think trauma and PTSD have a very like war, and that's fine. That's 100% true. Yeah, a lot of veterans do happen to have PTSD, which is a super huge deal that we should be focusing on, but trauma affects everyone differently, and some people don't have any trauma, and some people have a lot, and it's just small things that we don't think is a big deal, but they do. And so a lot of responses to that trauma can be just a lot of just reserved thoughts. Trauma responses, invalidating yourself all the time, constantly thinking that, obviously like, oh, I'm not actually feeling that way, Immediate trauma responses include like thinking, like I just stated, a lot of just self-doubt. It can also venture into the self-harm territory, but those are more coping skills. What is a trauma response? A trauma response is very embedded in your person. Obviously, this is going to be where I'm going to be talking about kinks currently, because it does happen to be a trauma response to a lot of people. Especially for people who were sexually abused as a child or sexually assaulted. Over-sexualization is a huge, huge, huge trauma response. It is a huge thought process to the person. It is such a huge response that it's one of the most common responses to sexual assault, and a lot of kinks come from that, from trauma. Now, I'm not saying everyone that has a kink has trauma, obviously, because that's just not true, but a lot of that does stem from something that you were lacking or something that you wish you could have had. So I've talked to tons of people that have different kinks that you can really see that are the manifestation of that. And Dr. Freud's idea of dreams being inherently sexual or undertoned, really goes into that, because I feel like his works are great. I really love him. He's a great thing to the psychology world. But that trauma response can also not be sexual. For example, when someone raises their hand too fast and you've been hit or abused in the past, you would flinch. And I feel like trauma responses aren't taken as seriously as if they don't. I don't know. I feel like people just don't take them as seriously as they should. Because trauma responses says a lot about you and a lot of the things that are really at a problem. So if you have a fear of fast movements, you really should think back to see if anything has happened, and if it hasn't, then don't self-diagnose, obviously, and don't self-diagnose for anything. But, there's still a lot of, you should think about it, at least. You should definitely, talk to someone. Coping skills. This is where the trigger warning is, okay? We're doing a trigger warning, obviously. Coping skills can range from self-harm, cutting, burning, anything under the sun, hairband snapping, ice and salt. Like, there are just tons of ways that are unhealthy to cope, and I think that that's obviously the first one, because I think that our parents didn't teach us how to cope, because once again, they didn't do anything with mental health. They didn't have any exposure to that. And so obviously, if they can't cope, they can't teach others. Just like I don't know rocket science, so I can't teach rocket science. So the coping skills of our generation and the generation past are just not great. Getting angry, spending money, just a lot of things can be coping mechanisms that you just do not realize yourself. There are tons of things. However, they're also not healthy. I think that a lot of coping mechanisms that we haven't been taught but that we've seen or that we observe are huge. They play a huge role in our lives. For example, like, if you come from a gambling household and you think that's the way to cope, then that can be a way to cope. Or if you come from drugs and alcohol issues in either side of your family or both or whatever, that might be ingrained that that's your way to cope. And obviously everybody has a different method that works for them. However, the more we rely on those coping mechanisms that aren't healthy, the more dangerous they become. So I talked to my therapist about coping mechanisms that she would recommend, and obviously a couple of them are sappy, but I will be reading the list. And just some personal recommendations along with this I will make at the end. But, for example, for good coping mechanisms, we can do journaling. You can write down any toxic thoughts that you have. I feel like that works for me a lot because it's recognizing those thoughts, and it's recognizing that they're dangerous and they're not logical, and that really helps with OCD and depression and anxiety. It helps with a lot of the rationalization parts of it. She recommended smelling salts. Smelling salts, now that sounds crazy, but if you were having a panic attack, smelling salts will knock you out of it. They're crazy. I personally recommend that too. That's super great. Fidget toys for people with ADHD, and obviously these are not solutions. These are just things to help. I have ADHD, and it's really bad. Like, I don't like to just sit still. I can't do anything. Like, recording this video is already hard enough. I don't like sitting through things and not doing things. And so, when you can't talk, obviously, or you can't do something, there's a lot of coping mechanisms that you don't really realize are coping mechanisms. That's also a huge thing. Like talking with your hands, if you like moving. I talk with my hands all the time. I can't not talk out my hands. It's just not possible. And a lot of just fidgeting for all of everything. Honestly, I've never met a mental disorder that doesn't enjoy fidgeting. Just try and set time for yourself to think back and reflect. Now, obviously, those thoughts may come out during those times. However, distracting yourself from them will not make them go away. And obviously, that's a hard thing for everyone to comprehend and cope with. Deep down, that we all know that distracting yourself by going on TikTok for 6 hours or, you know, God, I don't know what other people do, won't make them go away. So instead of finding distractions, find something, just take those couple minutes. It can be 10, it can be 5 if you're just starting out, and just sit with yourself in complete silence. It really is great for grounding. Meditation's also super amazing if you are willing to do that. Call a friend. I know that that's incredibly satire. Like, oh, call a friend. Yeah, duh. I'm bored, so I'm going to call a friend. But calling a friend that also has experience with some sort of trauma is also super great to be able to talk to each other. And don't let it be a 50 on 100 on 0. Obviously you still have to listen to them. Or, just call someone that you trust. Talk to someone about it, or you can talk to yourself about it. Talking it out into existence is great. I talk to myself all the time, and that might just be the only child. But if you also are just not great with words, or if you don't like, just distractions, I think drawing and painting feelings are really great if you have the artsy side. Yelling. Just screaming into, a pillowcase is really nice. It releases a lot of, great times. And if you are upset, don't make yourself more upset. This is what Jennifer said to me. Don't play your sad playlist. I know y'all have them. Don't watch a sad movie. Don't make yourself cry more. Try and do things that you enjoy. And I understand with depression, that doesn't work like that. You don't have any motivation to do that. But timers are your best friend. Set a timer for 2 minutes and just get up, and even if you just get up and you set a timer for 2 minutes and you stand up and you just pick up a shirt and put it in a pile that it wasn't in there before, then you did something and you were productive. I think obviously baby steps are the most important thing to everything with trauma. I think that you can't just delve face in, and I think I learned that the very, very hard way, but you can't just dive in and blurt it all out and expect that you're over it. It's obviously going to take time, and it's obviously going to take a lot of work to know what's right for you. And don't give up, because everybody does have something that does work for them eventually. And obviously, I hate this saying, it'll get better with time, but it really does. And I think that it sucks that you have to sit there and be patient, but I think that it's a huge part of growing as a person. Understanding and comprehending that you have to focus on you sometimes is a huge part of everybody's just understanding. And I think that that's when you can actually start to solve and delve into those issues, when you realize that your issues are important as well. And even if you think it's stupid, and even if you think it's smaller than others, don't compare trauma, by the way. That's just not correct. If I say, oh yeah, I was really traumatized by, falling off the swing at 5, and you're like, yeah, well, my dad shot himself. Don't do that. Please don't. And don't compare yourself to anyone's trauma, period, because everyone develops things differently, and trauma affects everyone just in very different ways, and I think that that is just not handled properly. Do I blame a lot of things for that? Yes, but please keep these options in mind. If you have any personal coping mechanisms that work for you, that are healthy, okay, please list them in the comments. Go outside, man. I can't say that I've been outside in a while, but, go outside, read something interesting, maybe. God, I sound like a guidance counselor. Yeah, but that is my little thing on trauma response. I do have one thing to say on this end credit here. Trauma does not give you an excuse to excuse, like, okay, okay, voice. Alright, pop off. Trauma doesn't mean that someone's identity, whether it be gender or sexuality, is based off of trauma. That's all I wanted to say. That's nuance, no nuance November. Period. So, I'm impressed that I got 2 videos done in 2 days. Oh, I feel professional. So, I will hopefully see you guys soon if I have any ideas or motivation. This has been Trauma Response. Type it in the comments if you have coping mechanisms. I think that's all. Okay. Bye.